We're right here, and this is the city that they built in just 2 years. This road, Trinity Avenue right here, is that busy street right up there. So all the laboratory and everything where they built the bombs was just across the street and looked to the west. The walking tour takes you here around Fuller Lodge and the Bathtub Row houses. Do you guys know why these are called Bathtub Row houses?
Oh yeah, because they were places with bathtubs.
Right. We are a National Historic Park. Do you know the difference between a National Historic Park and a National Park?
Historic parks are about history, national parks are just about nature.
And do you know what the difference if you were to hear a ranger program from a ranger in a national park versus what you'd hear from a ranger in a historical park?
He wouldn't want to talk about history.
Right.
The other guy would want to talk about nature.
Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you back to 1939. In Europe, Germany invaded another country. They were persecuting a religious people, an ethnic people called the Jews. A lot of the Jews were afraid of the Germans, so they left the country and they came to America. Well, at that time, two really bright, smart scientists came. One of them's name was Leo Szilard from Hungary, and the other one's name was Albert Einstein.
We know him.
Yeah, he and Leo Szilard wrote a letter to our president, Franklin Roosevelt, and told them that the Germans were working on a new kind of bomb that instead of being like dynamite or big firecrackers, things like that, this bomb was of atomic nature, which goes all the way down out to the molecules and the atoms that make up elements. And that whoever could make a bomb out of this, they would control the world. Well, Franklin Roosevelt, our president, believed them, and so he formed a committee to start looking into it. And this committee first met on Manhattan Island in New York, and that's how it got the name Manhattan Project. Well, they hired a general to lead this committee, and this general's name is Leslie Groves. And his job was to get all the people together to make this bomb. He hired a young 38-year-old scientist who was from Harvard, but he was working as a professor in California at the time. He was trained in Europe under some of the best minds in Europe. His name was Robert Oppenheimer.
We know him too.
Okay.
Weston he likes to act like him.
Wow, cool. So they are told by the government to look for a site that is highly secure, that's hard to find, and it has to already have electricity and water, or it has to already have buildings, it has to already be close to transportation, it has to be near people that can help build the city, it has to be inland 300 miles in west of Mississippi so it can't be bombed by our enemies. And you know what the last thing it had to have? It had to have great views. When you look at this picture, fences and guard towers, why do you suppose they built those?
To keep it safe from enemies.
Right. It wasn't to keep the enemies from coming in. It was to keep the people in here from getting out, like a prison.
What?
Yeah, this is the first time in American history American citizens are living on a military base. And it's so top secret that once they're here, they can never leave. Oppenheimer at the time thinks he's going to have 50 scientists working here. He ends up having 5,500. When they came here, they weren't told where they were coming. They weren't told what they were going to be doing. They weren't told how long they would live here. But they still were willing to come and do this. And they came here, and once you came through the main gate, did you see the main gate building? When you got there, you met the MPs. And if you were a child or a wife or a scientist or whatever, you all had to have a picture ID. There's a picture ID over there on the wall of a little girl who had to have one. Once you came through the gate, you weren't allowed to leave. Any mail that you sent or received was opened first and read. Make sure you weren't giving away secrets. All your telephone calls were listened to. And if you said certain things like bomb or certain people's names like Oppenheimer on the phone, they instantly hung up on you, and then you were called in front of the general to say why you were giving away secrets. And it was really hard on the wives and children because they're not used to living on a military base. They're used to being able to go outside and play anytime they want without having somebody holding a gun looking over them. And what they eventually had to do was start to find a way to make a bomb. And they found out they could make a bomb out of uranium. But uranium that you mine out of the ground, to make a bomb out of it, fill this room. And you can't make that fit on an airplane. So they had to come up with some other way to use uranium to make a bomb. And what they found was one little portion, 1/10 of 1% of the uranium you mined out of the ground was another kind of uranium that was much more powerful. And so if you had enough of it, you could make a small enough bomb that would fit on an airplane. And so what they did is they built a factory in Oak Ridge, Tennessee to take the little bit of uranium that was big uranium. So that's what they made in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, was a factory to do that. At the same time, there was a scientist up in Chicago, at Chicago Stadium, Stagg Field, which was a football field. Underneath the bleachers, there was a squash court, and there was a scientist who made a laboratory under there, and he did the very first nuclear chain reaction there.
Yeah, I remember that.
His name was Fermi.
Fermi.
Fermi. So what they found was when Fermi does this nuclear reaction, he makes a new element that never existed on Earth before, and it's called plutonium. And what they found out with the plutonium was it was even 1.5 times more powerful than the uranium. So they had to figure out a way to make a bomb using plutonium.
So how much did you make?
A gram. You know how much that is? The size of a paperclip. So they found when they could make a bomb, uranium like this, and it's called a cannon type bomb. And it's a bomb with a gun inside of it, or a cannon. And what the cannon does, it shoots a bullet of uranium at a target inside the bomb with some more uranium. And when they hit, the neutrinos would fly off, and the nucleus would split, causing the energy to be released, which would cause it to explode and be a bomb. And it was called the cannon type bomb. So they tried to make this same type of bomb using the plutonium, but what they found out was the plutonium had impurities in it. And so sometimes it would fizzle out and not go off at all, and other times it would go off before they wanted it to, which isn't really good if you're flying an airplane with a bomb on it and it goes off before you want it to. So they had to come up with a new way to make a new bomb. And what they came up with was they made a big steel ball.
I know. Hey, isn't that the picture in the book bomb?
Well, what they did on this big steel bomb was they took explosive charges that looked like paper plate, and they stacked them inside this big ball. You know what a soccer ball looks like? You know how it's got all the different sides, yes, like a dodecahedron? They did the same thing with explosive charges, and they stacked it all the way around inside this big steel ball. And then underneath those, they put more and more. So it was a bunch of these layers of explosive charges in the steel ball. And in the center of the steel ball was a ball of plutonium. They could detonate the outside ones, and then the next ones would go off, explode, the next ones explode off. And instead of exploding outwardly like dynamite does, the shock wave all went inside. It was called implosion. And the implosion concentrated the neutrinos so much that the nucleus split, and it caused it to release energy and explode. And the scientists thought this would work, but they weren't sure. So they took it down to where?
Trinity site.
Right. They took it to the Trinity site down here in New Mexico. But they didn't know exactly what it was going to do. They were kind of afraid.
So they made bomb shelters.
Exactly. They were within 5 miles from this bomb going on. July 16th, 1945, they set the bomb off at the Trinity site at 5:30 in the morning. It was so big and bright they could see the lights from it here in Los Alamos, 250 miles away.
Wow.
They didn't know for sure if it wasn't going to cause the whole Earth to explode. Because they didn't know if it'd get into the atmosphere and cause a chain reaction. So they also secretly told the governor of New Mexico to be prepared to evacuate everybody in New Mexico in case this explosion was too big. At the same time, the war in Europe had ended. Germany surrendered. And so there was only a war going on in the Pacific. A lot of the scientists wanted to quit because they thought the war was over, but the Americans had to convince them to stay here and keep working on it. At first, it was called patriotic. American people would have like gardens in their backyards called victory gardens, and they would raise food to eat because all the farmers' crops that they were raising was going to support the troops. The women that were used to always staying at home and just doing laundry and cooking and things, all of a sudden had to go out and work in the factories because all the men were overseas fighting in the war.
This is when women got to start working.
Right. You could teach this program. And so, but the American people were making lots of sacrifices. You could only get gasoline on certain days. You couldn't get a new car because all the car automobile manufacturers quit making cars during the war because they were making planes and tanks. And so it became a really hard time for the American people. And by 1945, the American people were tired of the war and making all the sacrifices. They wanted the war to end. Franklin Roosevelt, our president, had passed away. And the new president was Harry Truman. He wanted to end the war because lots of people were getting killed in the war. Finally, what he decided, the best way to stop the war
was to set off the atomic bomb?
He was meeting with the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, and the Prime Minister of Russia, Joseph Stalin, to decide how they could make Japan surrender. When he was meeting with them, he got a message from his secretary here in America, and she said, "The mother and baby are doing fine. Operation went really well. The baby boy did better than we expected. In fact, we can hear him screaming 250 miles away." It was code, meaning we just set the bomb off and it worked. So he tells Churchill and Stalin that we now have an atomic bomb. And Churchill's really surprised from Great Britain, even though he had scientists here from Great Britain working on it. He didn't know we were that far along. Stalin isn't surprised at all. Do you know why?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Because his scientists had already gotten nearly just as far as they had.
Do you know how?
Because
Someone
Klaus
was
Fuchs was sharing information about it to Harry Gold.
Yes. There were spies that got out and gave away the secrets. Not only Fuchs, but there was another man named David Greenglass. He was the brother to Ethel Rosenberg, who actually were electrocuted in an electric chair for giving away secrets for treason. And he gave the secrets away to Russians also. So the Russians already knew how to make the bomb. So Truman wants to end the war. So he ends up deciding to drop the atomic bomb. The Enola Gay takes off with the uranium bomb from Tinian Island. It's 1,500 miles from Tinian Island to Japan and back. 12 hours of flying time. And the B-29s, the big airplanes they had to drop the bombs weighed 7 tons. And so they had to strip all the guns off of the B-29s and take all their armor plating off of them because they had to put on extra fuel just so they could make it. The Enola Gay took off and it dropped the bomb on Hiroshima on August 6th. The bomb goes off and it levels 5 square miles of land, 70 out of 72 buildings. It kills 60,000 Japanese people instantly, with another 80,000 people within a year from injuries caused from the radiation and from the shockwave. Japan still won't surrender. So then Russia joins the war against Japan. They'd been our allies in Europe, but they weren't our friends in Japan. So now they join up against Japan. Japan still won't surrender. So then they decide to drop the next bomb. And they go to fly and drop the bomb on a town called Kokura. But the problem was it was covered in clouds and smoke because they'd been firebombing some other cities in Europe. And the bomb guy couldn't sight into where to drop the bomb at Kokura. Finally, they decide they have to go to their second choice. Instead, poor Nagasaki was the unlucky people.
The first one was the little boy.
And do you know why they're called that? Little boy was named after Franklin Roosevelt because he was small and thin and sickly. Fat man was named after Winston Churchill because he was pretty robust, big. So they dropped the bomb, plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. It's 1.5 times more powerful, but it kills about the same amount of people. Devastates only 3.5 miles because Nagasaki is kind of in a valley, and so the mountains kind of contain the damage, where in Hiroshima it's on a flat plain, and so the damage went out a long ways. The war is over, and they announced the existence of the secret city of Los Alamos, and they're getting ready to close it down. A lot of the scientists are going home because the war is over. But guess what? The women that were here in Los Alamos had gotten united. And whenever they needed something, like they wanted to, say, a new sidewalk going to the school, they would kind of organize the city council, and they would petition the general saying, we need a new sidewalk going to the school, or we need a culvert put here across the road where it's always muddy. And so they'd kind of gotten united. The women wanted Los Alamos to be kept open. A lot of the scientists signed a petition saying they wanted atomic power to be not used for weapons, but for peaceful means, like generating electricity and powering ships. They eventually convinced the government to form the Atomic Energy Commission, which was going to oversee the atomic power and also to keep Los Alamos laboratories open to study using atomic power for peaceful means. And the women won. And so they got a seat at the table, a voting seat, and the government formed the commission. And because of that, Los Alamos is here today.
Or else we want to be over here.
Or else this would be torn down?
It would have been a facility used for what, 5 years?
Yeah.
Is that long?
4 years.
4 years?
I would turn into a ghost town.
Turn into a ghost town.
Yeah.
Go women.
You know what's happened throughout history? Every time women have gotten united for a cause, history has changed.
Great things happen.